and welcome to this week's Mailbox. What this is where I pick up on comments from various platforms and go over them in a little bit more detail. I try and read all the comments where possible. Occasionally I have to miss the odd one out if I get quite a lot in a particular week. And I can't respond to all of them. And some of the ones I can respond to, you sort of feel I'm not responding in as much detail as I would like. So this is where I sort of pick out some of them. Patron comments, obviously, top priority, so I'll do those first. And then ones from, say, Twitter or like YouTube mostly after that. So for this week, first of all, the Patron questions, as I said, or statements. One was about the final boss video I did last week with Bay. Sort of ends up here saying, hopefully open up more doors for you, either through ideas for your channel or further invites to other streamers. I had sort of considered and wanted in the future to at least add the odd guest now and then on my live Ret Q&As. So I did the latest one of those yesterday. It did actually open my eyes a little bit, the experience, because, you know, I may not have considered all the things. Like, first of all, bear in mind, Bay has been doing this for quite a long time and he's well set up for it, very efficiently set up. And yet, it takes quite a while to actually set it up. So, Branditz and myself went on there. It took a good half an hour before the show actually started to get it all set up. Maybe a bit longer, actually, 40 minutes maybe. So it takes quite a while, and remember, he's all set up for it, really, but actually getting everything all fitting in there. So it's made me sort of consider some of the practical, logistical problems I will have to solve if I do that myself. So it was quite a useful experience for that. Next comments about Warcraft Vlogs. I've been doing a series for a while now. It's like, you know, I do a series where I get an episode each week, which I bring out on Patreon on a Sunday, and then make it public on YouTube on Thursday. And at the moment, I'm doing a Warcraft Vlogs series. So there'll be one of those coming on Patreon today, and then on YouTube, of course, on Thursday as normal. This time round, it's going to be on priority targets, or at least correct targets. And I was sort of asked, is it like teacher mode, or is it how I actually do it? There are some videos where it is more what you'd call teacher mode, and some of it is how I would actually approach it, like what I'd call practical demonstrations. The Warcraft Vlogs one is very much a practical demonstration. So in each sort of episode, I focus on a particular thing, and then what I do is I show you with actual logs, my actual logs, what I'd be looking for, and it is the same sort of process that I would be looking for. It's the same as when I've done some Ret Paladin logs analysis, and there may be another one of those coming this week. Sorry to those who, sometimes people message me to do some of these, sometimes I don't have time, sometimes I do have time, so it's a little bit hit and miss whether I do yours, so apologies for that. But I may be doing one this next week. But yeah, so those tend to be practical demonstrations of what I would actually do as I'm doing it. Final Patreon one says, would love a video on player housing in future expansions from your point of view. As I say, like with patrons, I do tend to sort of prioritize sort of suggestions. I mean, the Warcraft Vlogs series, for example, was a patron suggestion itself. The player housing is certainly one I'd been planning on anyway. I mean, the thing is, like, Blizzard with World of Warcraft seem to be standing alone at the moment as certainly the only MMO I have played recently that doesn't have player housing. I mean, if you think about other games I've played recently, Elder Scrolls Online now has player housing, Star Wars The Old Republic has player housing, Lord of the Rings Online has had player housing like since day one, I think. Black Desert Online has player housing, it's like World of Warcraft does. And the player housing is always different in all of those. And I do think, you know, that you do have to think about it quite carefully. I do have very definite ideas about what I would do with player housing in World of Warcraft. So I would be hoping to use examples from those other games, but also to sort of highlight what I would do differently for World of Warcraft housing, were I in charge and said, like, this is what we're going to do. So I will be doing a video on that. It probably won't be in the next week because I need to get footage, and that involves beating this computer into submission and getting Star Wars The Old Republic onto it. So that's likely to be the week after. But it is going to be in the next 2 weeks because I do very much want to do that. Next one. So this is a Twitter comment. So this is from someone who's written a forum post that said, so I wrote a forum post on Ret Changes. Would love to see your experienced input on it. So I did read it. What it is you get these quite a lot, is redesigns of certain abilities. What I would say is in this case, it depends what you want it to be. If it's if you like designing and it's just a creative thing for you, the equivalent of fan art, should we say, but like fan design, that you're putting on the forum so that people can respond to it, that's fine. If you want to do that, that's absolutely fine. If, however, your motivation behind it is, I think this is a good idea, I want Blizzard to read it and go, oh, that's a good idea, let's do that, that will never happen. And it will never happen for two reasons. The first reason, you can suggest little things that solve a problem, that's one thing. But to suggest redesigns of various abilities, you're basically telling Blizzard developers that they're getting it wrong. They're quite touchy. They don't really like that. The second reason is, if you're going to redesign abilities to claim that it's solving a problem regarding DPS, you need to prove that, and you need to prove it with math. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to write yourself some new scripts for, say, simulation craft, run some sims, and demonstrate that it will solve the problem without being overpowered, which is absent from there. So you would have to be a theory crafter, really, and write your own stuff for that. So again, it depends what you want. If it's a creative thing for you, then great. If it's, I think Blizzard should do this, then yeah, it won't. Nothing will come of it. Next question, it says, this is to do with, again, all the Mythic Tomb of Sargeras tuning that's been going on. This has been a bit of a theme this week. So it says, I honestly think Exorcism Method is acting like crybabies by the fact they have tons of wipes on progress in Tomb of Sargeras. Remember when I raided properly 8 to 10 years ago and had to progress on certain fights for weeks before the tuning and Blizzard fixed stuff we meet, the so-called walls. Now, what I would say to this one is, I have, and I said this on the stream yesterday actually, I have no issue with wall bosses. What we mean by wall bosses are ones that you get to and you cannot beat them. Not because they're too difficult, but because you cannot meet the DPS requirements or the healing requirements, or your tanks just get one shot or something like that. In other words, it's a gear issue. As soon as you've got enough gear, you will get past it. There certainly did used to, in the early days, be certain bosses that were like that. I have no issue with them, and if Blizzard did want to redesign their raiding philosophy to include some of these bosses in a raid tier, I have no issue with that at all. However, that's not what's happened here. Blizzard have made a mistake. They've just I could make an Illidan joke about it not being prepared, but Tomb of Sargeras was not prepared for launch. That's why they've been making lots of changes. It's not been fine-tuning either. Fine-tuning is one thing that happens. This is when you change things so radically that the whole strategy has to change, then that's not the same thing. Also, we're making the mistake here of it just being affecting these couple of guilds, because they were the ones who first of all killed their sort of last boss. And as I say this now, it's all been finished. Method have now actually defeated Kil'jaeden on Mythic, so congrats to them. But it's affected everyone. Anyone who even attempted Mythic Goroth, the very first boss in that first week, whether they killed it or not is irrelevant. Anyone who even attempted it was affected by this, because it's not just the last two bosses that Blizzard have made major changes on, or that something has gone wrong with it. There's been bosses all the way through the instance have been tangibly changing to the point where people have had to re-progress on them the following week. The last time I can remember this happening was in MoP in Siege of Orgrimmar, when the third boss went through a major redesign after the first week, and you had to use a different strategy the following week, and that was one boss. This is loads of bosses. But the other thing is, let's go back to that wall thing. Let's say Blizzard had that design philosophy in mind and it was a deliberate thing, which it's not. But if it was, they should say so. Again, people have, I don't know what people's impression of the top raiders is, how their lives pan out, how they think they fund themselves. I really don't understand it. Some of them are able to fund themselves from their streaming and stuff like that, and promotions and what have you. Some are not. Many are not. Some of them have jobs. Actual honest to goodness jobs. So what they do is they have to book time off as part of their holiday to be able to do this world first raiding, and they have to decide how much time they're going to need, because they can't just say book a load of time off. For a start, their job may not really want them booking a month off, but secondly, that'd be like using most of their holiday. They know they're going to have to do this a couple of times a year, so they need to book off enough time to make sure they kill it, but not loads extra. Well, when it gets to the point where this takes much longer than anticipated, you're putting an unnecessary strain on those guilds. And you have to bear in mind it's not just those guilds if you don't care about those guilds. You know, there's lots of people watch them and like watching them. So there's a lot of people invested in those guilds as well. They're fans. So just common decency would suggest that if it was your plan to introduce a different philosophy for raiding, that Blizzard should say so. But as I say, in this case, it wasn't. It was just, it was mistakes. Next one, I get this a couple of times, says alt is an abbreviation for alternative. That's why it's usually pronounced with the low A sound like in wall, rather than the A sound like in aggravating. So what you're saying is that when we make another word that is an abbreviation of a previous term, that we pronounce it in exactly the same case. We don't. I'll give you a couple of examples. Now, I am fairly old now by gaming standards. I was around, I grew up in the 80s. I was born in the late 70s, but I grew up in the 80s. Around about the late 70s, we had this thing in music. We had record players, we had tape players and all that. We didn't have really CDs, and we certainly didn't have digital music as we do now. So sound reproduction was quite important. Then this thing came out, and the term was used, high fidelity, which literally means a high reproduction, like faithful. Fidelity means faithful. So it referred to a good reproduction of the original sound. But we didn't call these things high fidelity systems because that's a bit of a gobful, so we abbreviated. Now, going by that logic that we pronounce all the parts of the words the same, we would have called this abbreviation hi-fi. But we didn't call it hi-fi, we called it hi-fi. Because, you know, it's a new word in its own right, and we'll pronounce it in the way that seems sensible. Another one, a very obvious one, would be, for example, combine and combination. Now, combine comes from the Latin combini. Now, I say combini. It could be combini. I don't know. Because we don't know how the ancient Romans, pronounced their words. They didn't have tape recorders at the time. But either way, whatever it happens to be, combine and combination have the same etymology, and we pronounce them differently. We should say, according to your argument, combine and combination, or combine and combination. We shouldn't say combine and combination, but we do. So, there you go. There are 3 things you should get used to on my channel, by the way. 1 is alt, 2 is beta, and 3 is artifact. Next comment here, I actually don't understand this one. It says, why is it only the lights and those who stream get to try the PTR? I don't know what lights are, by the way. If someone can enlighten me on that one, that'd be appreciated. However, there's a bit of a misconception here, the person that wrote this. It isn't only the whatever that first term means and people who stream that get to PTR. Anyone who has an account can go into the PTR. You just go into your account settings and there's an option in there to be able to download and play on the PTR. Anyone can do it. So I'm not quite sure where this comment comes from. Alphas and betas, there's that word again, beta. They are invitational things. Blizzard sort of choose people. And indeed, the people who first get into the open alphas will indeed be high profile streamers, because it's essentially a marketing device, getting those people on, so they can get people excited about the sorry, there's some beeping going on somewhere. So what the hell? I don't know if you could hear that. I could hear beeping. I'm either going mad or someone's got a bicycle bell in the barbecue, my neighbours. Yeah, anyone can go. You know, you can't all. Not everyone can go into the beta and the alpha, but anyone can go into the PTR. Just go into your account settings. All right, next one. I've got a lot of sympathy for this one. It says, I've taken a character from 1 to 110 and faced 0 challenge. Dungeons are speedruns, blah, blah, blah. The thing with this one is leveling in an MMO, and I've played a number of MMOs, and I've played some as like, you know, seriously, like World of Warcraft, some very casually, some ultra casually, like Star Wars The Old Republic. I have never got a character to level cap in that, ever. I've sometimes returned to it, done a bit of leveling, never got to level cap. Leveling in an MMO is an advanced tutorial. This is how I describe it. It's there for my money to do 2 things. 1, to introduce you to the core concepts of the game, as that includes your character, how to play your character, and 2, to introduce you to some of the storyline of the game, to immerse you in the world. Now that we've got several expansions in and we're up to 110 levels, I think leveling takes far too long for those things. And I don't think even accelerated level. I mean, we have heirlooms now, but that's for alts. Oh, there's that word again. I'm thinking from the point of view of new players who wouldn't get heirlooms. So they, even if you massively reduce the amount of experience you need for each level, which they tend to do with each additional expansion, they make it a little bit quicker for previous ones sometimes. Even that's not going to do it. It's just too long. The process is too long. Everyone knows that the game begins at end game. Yes, you need, as I say, you need enough time to learn to play that character. You don't just plonk someone at level cap with all those abilities and they've got to work them out. It is better to give people abilities a little bit at a time, get used to them and give them a new one. And as I say, you need enough to immerse them in the world. But it's too much. And I think they should assign a team to come up with some innovative ideas for dealing with this now. That it's lots of expansions in. They really should. And I don't just mean skips, like character boosts, which of course is a paid thing for anyway. I don't mean that, because again, you go back to the first problem where they're missing out on getting the abilities a bit at a time. It just takes too long. So I have a lot of sympathy for people who think that it's a zero challenge game and not really worth spending a lot of time on, because why would they? Because the game doesn't change for these people until they get to level 110. And that's a shame. Next one, it says, how am I 4 out of 9 of their suggestions? That's as in suggested videos. I don't know. It's nothing to do with me. If it was anything to do with me, I would be 9 out of 9 of your suggested videos. This is entirely to do with the YouTube algorithm. So my sincere apologies, but nothing to do with me. Next one, it says, why, again coming back to the tuning in Tomb of Sargeras, why should Blizzard fine-tune the raids for just 2 guilds that want to rush it in 1 or 2 weeks? There are thousands of other guilds that will do Mythic and blah, 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 blah. Like I've said before, really, I sort of answered this before, I shouldn't have put it in again. It affected everyone. Every Mythic raider. Whether or not they even killed a boss in that first Mythic week, it affected them. Because when they came to do it the following week, the fights were different. So that's why we should care. Next one, interesting one, says this was to do with account sharing. So one clarification, if you're a parent and you have an underage kid playing, then you can account share, and it is not against terms of service. This is forced by law, at least in the UK. It's actually EU law, and this is where, you know, bear in mind most computer game companies are American, and they will write their terms of service. They usually write them to be very restrictive, and they get away with that because law in the United States allows for it. EU law, there's a lot more consumer rights in the EU, I think. I say that. I only say that because there's been plenty of stories in the last few years where American games companies and game service companies have fallen foul of EU law. The European courts has basically slapped them. Steam was a famous one a couple of years ago. There was a bit of an issue where people were wanting to sell the games on that they bought on Steam, and Steam were going, no, you can't do that. It's attached to you. You're not allowed to sell it on. The European court said, yes, they are. It's a product. If you buy a product, you are allowed to sell it on when you no longer require it. And so Steam had to make the necessary changes for that because their terms of service in that particular case were in breach of European law. And you know, plenty of companies get into trouble. Microsoft get into trouble all the time with the European courts and all the rest of it because, as I say, they design any company will always try and come up with terms of service that are as beneficial to the company as possible, which is not in favour of the customer all the time. And they will obviously write it with American law in mind, but it's not always. And they'll try and get away with it elsewhere, even when they know it's going to be against the law there, because someone has to actually take them to court. But then, you know, that does happen. So that's just a little point there. Limits being an American guild, of course, is would not be subject to European law. It would be interesting if Limit were a European guild, if they could have sort of appealed against it on that basis. Some people have noted that isn't it odd that European guilds tend to get away with some of the things that Limit haven't. Now, I've got a couple of suggestions with this. One is that Limit tend to do it very publicly. That's possibly why they're getting slapped down. Other guilds, we sort of know it happens. But with other guilds, they don't make a song and a dance about it. They're not throwing it in your face. So it's easy for Blizzard to turn a blind eye. But it could also be possible, just possible, that in actual fact that particular term of service is not legally enforceable in the EU in the way that it is in North America. I'm not a solicitor. Don't take anything I say as gospel on that issue. Next one, it says, can you add links to the stories you cover? Would be helpful for viewers who are interested to research them further. Sure, if I base a vlog on a story for which there is a link, I can absolutely do that, and I generally do that. If I don't, it's only because I've forgotten. Sometimes people say in the comments and I'll put it in. This particular case, this again was all the limit stuff, was not practical to do that because it wasn't based on a link. It was based, there were some links to websites, but there were several of those. But the other thing is, an awful lot of it was based on conversations with people. I can't obviously link those. And if I even tried, it would involve at least dozens. I might be exaggerating with hundreds. At least dozens of links and image files and all the rest of it if people wanted to see all my sources. So in this particular video, it wasn't all that practical to do so. Next one. This is a bit of a comment. I'm going to have a go at this one. It says, funny how he be me. Says, another few weeks of Nighthold would have been fine when people were leaving due to no new content. You don't know anything of the sort. We don't know anything like that. We don't know who's joining and leaving the game. We don't know what numbers are like in the game. We have no way of measuring that. We have some way of measuring sort of the amount of raid content that's going on, because we can extrapolate some information by the number of new logs going on Warcraft Vlogs. If we assume that that's roughly the same proportion of people, because not everyone who raids puts logs on, of course, but if we assume the proportion remains roughly the same, we could suddenly see if there was a massive drop-off in raid content. And that's what you'd be talking about here, because all that came out with Tomb of Sargeras was the raid. They made some changes to the game, but no new actual content. It was the raid. So it would, it was only new content for raiders, and raiders tend not to be the ones that unsubscribe anyway. I mean, some people that do LFR, sure, but generally speaking, but that hadn't shown any drop off Warcraft logs either. So I think what this is a person, and you also, even if they did, even if there was a drop off in numbers, you can't possibly say it's because of no new content. You've no idea if there's a drop off in numbers, what it's due to. But as I say, there's no evidence there was even a drop-off in numbers. We don't know that. The only people that could possibly know that are Blizzard. So I think this is a person who was thinking to themselves they didn't want to wait any longer for Tomb of Sargeras, and just assumed that everyone else thought the way they do. Because, and I didn't get a response to this. The same person actually tried saying the same thing on a completely unrelated comment on another video. But again, there's no evidence to back that up whatsoever. So there you go. And then the last one was to do with the Black Temple one. So I'm going to be doing Black Temple a bit later on with my guild. I will be streaming it. I can't say exactly what time it will be. I think it'll be about 7 PM UK time. Usual raid time, but I'm not entirely sure. But of course, if you're following me on Twitch, then you will get a notification, I suppose, when I do start streaming. I don't know how long it's going to be. Like, some people have been saying, oh, it took us 1.5 hours. Some people about 3 hours. I don't know. But someone here, because I did a video with my recollections of the mechanics to try and help some people out, because I thought, it's only out for a week, and it wouldn't be a shame if someone couldn't finish it off because they weren't aware of certain mechanics. So I did a bit of a video where I went through what I thought were the most important mechanics, with a bit of footage. Actually, it's quite ironic. Black Temple was the first tier. Oh, it's Hydra as well. But Black Temple was the first tier where I recorded all the fights. But I don't have them all. They've all been lost in the dark, dusty recesses of time, apart from the few that I put up on there. And someone noted RET during BC, lol. Anything under 1500 DPS wasn't allowed in our raids. We had a RET pally geared to the gills. Did we have gills? I don't remember having gills. Anyway, crap DPS, man, I miss BC. And there's a couple of people responded here, sort of questioning this assertion. I would certainly question it myself. You've got to bear in mind, as can be quite clearly seen from the videos I've got on my RET there. One, I was an Alliance Retribution Paladin. We couldn't do anywhere near as much damage as our Horde brethren, even though the Horde ones had the annoying seal twisting, which I've heard so much about, but I suppose thankfully didn't have to experience. Secondly, I was a clicker. So there's that. I mean, we didn't have that many abilities. I don't actually think, still to this day, that was any sort of great disadvantage. And I was in a guild that stuffed back down his hole, killed Jaden, well before the pre-Wrath expansion came out. We were in a pretty good guild, right, top 70. And I was able to compete at the top of that. I wasn't buggering about at the bottom of the meters. I was a core raider. That means brought in for all progress fights. I was at the top of the meters, or thereabout, in the top 5 always. And occasionally right at the top, especially on fights like Brutalis, where we got to use our exorcism as well. So yeah, you know, and that was as an alliance ret, so, and a clicker. So we, you know, I'm not going to say ret was fine in Burning Crusade. It was very far from fine, but the damage was possible. The unfine things were the fact that it was hugely frustrating to play a ret at the time. But we were capable of doing the damage, so I really don't know what that was about. But anyway, yeah, so I am going to be on doing a bit of Black Temple this evening, so you could join me then, or if not, otherwise I will see you when I do my next video. See you later.